Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are just going to take a few minutes as we get folks joining, and then we'll get started. Awesome. Great to see a number of folks joining in. Fantastic. All right, here we go. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited about the discussion that we are going to have. So this should be a fantastic panel. This lead dev panel is hosted and created in partnership with the Fusion Auth team. So appreciate the partnership there. The discussion will last about 45 minutes. After that, myself and the panelists will join you in Slack for more conversations async. So don't hesitate to join and drop some questions there. But while we're live, I will try to make sure to incorporate your questions. So if you want to submit any questions, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. If you need help, please drop a ping in the chat, and someone from Lead Dev is happy to help you as well. So let's get started. We'll do some introductions just quickly so you get to know the panelists and experts on this topic, and we'll dive into the conversation from there. So to get going, my name is Delia Havens. I'm the SVP of Engineering at Lucid, and I'll be your moderator for today's conversation. So to start off, I'll hand it to you, Dan, to kick us off.
Sure. I'm excited to be here. This is a timely and complex topic. I'm a senior director for SIAM strategy and identity standards at FusionAuth, and we're happy to partner with you all today. We're an identity provider like Auth0 or Cognito. That fancy title means that I spend some time thinking about the future of customer identity and access management, both at industry standards groups like the IETF, or also looking at the wider market. I also help customers and FusionAuth community members create solutions with our tool. And I also love to talk about authentication, authorization, and OAuth. So I'm excited to nerd out about this here. I've written a couple of books, and I've been in the engineering practice for about 25 years. Looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Aisha, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Aisha. I'm currently head of application platform security at Aviva. In my career, I had worked in security operations, security engineering, cloud security. Spent some time at AWS working on security solutions designs and architecture, and just joined Aviva 3 months ago. Heading application platform, looking after platform security, and with that comes a lot of data platforms and of course AI integrations with complexities. So although SIAM are not new topics to me, looking at authentication and authorization for AI has been a new challenge.
Very cool. All right, Tanvi, we'd love to hear about you as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Dalia. Dan. Aisha, really happy to be here on this panel. This is Tanvi. I lead the customer solutions team for AWS for a large set of customers that run their infrastructure with AWS. And that is why this topic of security overall and authenticating and privacy is very close to my heart because it's priority zero for how we function. I've been in this cloud computing world for over 11 years now, and it's always amazing to see how the shifts in technology impact the way customers run their infrastructure and provide us the learning to do better in terms of the infra that we provide. So super excited for this conversation and also to learn from Dan and Aisha from their side of the world, how they look at authentication and authorization.
Awesome. I'm super excited as well. So thank you all for the introduction. So to kind of frame the topic of conversation today, we're talking about user authorization becoming more complex. And that's, I think, we spent last year sort of in the hype of AI and all the things that come with it, but it's pretty clear that we are also seeing a lot of fantastic applications from these agents interacting with our systems and becoming more and more autonomous. And that's really what's starting to like add up to the complexity. We are now having to not only think about the humans and what access and level of permissions they have, but now we have to really consider the agents and how to give them the right level of permissions to be autonomous and do things on our behalf. So like the thing here is that this is not just a read-only access that we're talking about. If we want them to be productive in our workflows and to take actions on our behalf, we do have to consider the specifics and nuances. And of course, security is a big part of it, when to deprovision some access and all of the things that we're going to dive into today. So we're gonna, as you can tell, like this group of panelists are very invested in the topic, and I'm super excited to get their thoughts on it. And of course, like I said, I encourage you to submit questions if there's something that you would like to add to the conversation. I'll keep an eye on the Q&A tab. So let's get going. Before we dive into all things agents, I figured we'd start by framing a little bit the conversation around what we currently have for humans and the authorization models that we have today. And then if you would like to each speak on sort of that baseline and what you're adding in when you think about agents. So maybe Aisha, do you want to start us off with this question?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with if from my side, my experience, like it straight away. So traditionally, like in many other organizations, the organizations I worked at, we had a mix of role-based access control, group-based access. If you really, really go back into the past, you will see different authentication authorization methods, but yeah, not necessarily worried about those anymore. When you look at those ABAG, policy-based, et cetera, they were all taking into account a user or a machine. And now we have essentially the problem of identity no longer mapping to a person. An agent can act for multiple users, can act for a service. So who is doing the action is sort of becoming messy now. Permissions need to be more dynamic. Static roles may either we will have the all or nothing, too big or too small problem with the static roles, and the volume is increasing. Sometimes mid tasks, permission escalation may be required, etc. So all these complexities are bringing a lot to scratch my head with my security hat on. So the shift is from how do we authorize a user to authorizing specific action in a specific context for a specific delegated identity, and how do I make that auditable? Starting on a negative note, but yeah, the complexity we have now.
That's what we all love to do, though. All right, Dan, do you have any more you'd like to add? I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure, yeah, and I'm glad that Aisha mentioned RBAC, and I think that it's worthwhile for us to look at some of the other models out there because I think she pointed out some good nuances, but it's good to have a firm foundation. And one thing I always say when I'm starting these conversations is you're worried about AI authorization, but how's your human authorization, right? There's a lot of people who start out and want to jump immediately to the cool, new, shiny thing, but haven't set the foundation themselves. So I think, RBAC, ABAC, REBAC, I'm not going to dig too deep into these pieces, but I think that those are things that you can go look up yourself and read up on those authorization models. But, setting those aside, the real issue is I think agents get ill-defined instructions and they take actions we don't expect. I was talking to a coworker about this webinar and he said, oh yeah, one time I said to my agent, delete all the files that have this string in it because he needed to do that for some reason, and ended up deleting an entire folder because that folder had that string in the name. And I think that those kind of unintentional consequences where the agent is doing exactly what you told it to do, not what you meant it to do, are the reason that we need those dynamic, fine-grained authorization rules that Aisha mentioned. People are still learning the capabilities. I am myself, and whether you're an end user or a developer, or a security admin. And then I think that our authorization systems are decent at human beings, again, as long as you implemented them correctly, and pretty good at service accounts as well. But like this combination of something that's non-deterministic like human beings and moves at the speed of software brings in some new challenges.
Yeah, for sure. Tanvi, I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of like Dan touched on an example, but I'm curious, when did you first realize that the traditional authorization models are not going to be quite working for the AI agent world that we're stepping into?
That's a great question, right? Like, I'll piggyback into what Dan was mentioning about the human aspect of it, right? But before we go there, I come from a customer facing background, right? Like, not that I interact with a product or have a product team, but I'm more field facing in my role. So I capture those inputs to come back and kind of create this space in a better way. So, from that aspect, I look at the situation in two ways of like authentication is basically a situation where who you are, right? And authorization is a method to do or prove who you are. And the way I realized that as was I was having conversations with our customers, they're starting to get more and more worried about these two questions, right? Like, how do I know who is coming in and by what method they are coming in, right? That was my first encounter and clicking as we all started to learn about this transformation of technology from initially traditional AI, ML to generative AI to now agentic AI over the course of the past couple of years, right? So that's where I kind of first interacted in these situations. The way I kind of have been navigating these conversations is now even more emphasizing the need of a human in the loop as we are starting to use these awesome authentication tools, and how we should be able to put some processes and guardrails in place so that we don't have systems that run rogue. So those are kind of the areas I've been focusing on it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Dan, I want to go a bit deeper in sort of like your example and of course like drawing a bit more broadly, but when an AI agent acts on behalf of the user, how do you determine the permissions that it should have? Do you give it full scope of that user permission, or like what granular work have you done on sort of like the technical details of that implementation?
Yeah, and I think that you don't give it full scope unless you're like YOLOing and you have your entire system backed up and it's not in prod, right? So that's an easy guardrail to lay out first. But I mean, I think there's a couple of different ways you can think about like setting boundaries around agents. And one is, be careful with your prompt. If my coworker had said, don't delete directories with this string in it, but delete files only, because I guess in Unix a file is a directory, or no, a directory is a file. Anyway, neither here nor there. That can help to some extent. That again is relying on the agent's ability to follow instructions. And then another layer is to kind of build out sub-agents so that you have a separation of concerns so that you have an agent that deals with the file system and other deals with different services. This is less preventing an agent from doing something stupid and more like limiting the blast radius if they do something stupid. And then the last is really that this deterministic system that we talked about, which, to be honest with you, is still something that we're grappling with defining, right? Like there's some work in the standardization space. OpenID has an AI community group that they're working to like define some of these things. I know the AuthZen, which is an OpenID standards group, just kind of released their 1.0. But to be honest with you, uh, um, I don't have all the answers. Big shocker. I hope that the other panelists have all the answers and I can just observe with them. But um, I think the fundamental thing to take away, and then I'll wrap up, is again, just reiterating that like this stuff is happening at software speed, which means that you need to start to enforce rules and dynamically change rules based on software, not manual approval processes.
Yeah, makes sense. Yes, I agree with you. We don't all have the answer, but like we're very much deep into it. Aisha, I'd love to
Dan,
talk a
yeah,
bit about. Oh,
if I may
yes, of
intervene and
course,
piggyback on Dan's
please.
stuff, right? I think the way Dan you mentioned about having separate agents for a certain task is super critical as we implement even large scale systems, right? And now with that, even having better fault injection, threat detection kind of situations is going to be critical because we want to test the systems for situations where, like what Dan was saying, if a system does anything stupid, what's our process to handle it, right? So that's also critical as we discover answers to how agentic AI is going to transform this situation. Sorry to interrupt.
No, no, not at all. This is actually great because I was segueing very, very much into like let's talk a bit more about like these security concerns. And I think, Isha, I'd love to hear from you if you want to kind of kick us off with this question. But what are the biggest security concerns when it comes to these AI agents having the elevated permission? I think we talked at a high level, but how are you mitigating some of these risks, especially things like prompt injection or agents being manipulated? In a way or another. Again, like we're talking about like some of these like different than expected results that maybe we've anticipated before.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to start with saying that everyone is catching up, right? Security is catching up, IAM is catching up, the authentication authorization area, even the platforms that offer AI, they're catching up as to, what's going to happen. The use cases are coming up as in when we're learning. So we can't necessarily gauge what the use cases will be that will present those risks. So we're sort of swimming in uncharted territory, but there are things we can do. So number one, and I really want to iterate this and highlight, is how well you do authentication and authorization as an organization currently is only going to be amplified with your AI and AI agent use. So if you don't have good practices already in place, you're not necessarily going to bring in this third miraculous solution for your AI authorization that will solve all the problems. So essential work, go and find out housekeeping, what can I do better for security to begin with? And then we, in parallel or afterwards, we worry about how else is this impacting our security, right? So my biggest concern, of course, is these are engines that are persuadable. They're executing things, and we are relying on our existing authorization methods with them. So that's the biggest concern. Models are getting better in what they can offer. As the model in terms of prompt injection attempts, being able to identify malicious prompts, etc. Platforms that offer these AI models are getting better in offering shield guardrails, content filtering, etc. But what I would like to say is segregation, segregation, and segregation. If your backend is segregated enough and you're using your databases are laid out really well, you're really aware of where your data is sitting, you have a good control of your residency, labeling, and tagging, etc., then it's going to be easier to put in those multi-agent and fine-grained authorization mechanisms. So we're looking at task scoped, least privileged, and look at in your input and output controls. Have you got your monitoring and anomaly detection in place with the guardrails, logging and auditing, etc.? So there is a checklist somewhere out there, and I'd be happy to get any questions on this without going into the rabbit hole.
No, this is like very, very solid points, especially on sort of like, jumping to the next complex thing without strengthening the foundation and how critical it is to really sort of look back and make sure that your systems are in good shape for what you're building on top of as well. Dane, did you have anything you want to add to this question before we transition to the next point?
Sure, yeah, a few things. One is, Aisha, I love that you started with the IAM excellence being required. And I think that that's something we're seeing across all aspects of AI, right? It's an amplifier. And I see that with documentation, I see that with coding, and it certainly is true with this as well. I think it's really important that people experiment at, in controlled environments because they want to build an intuitive sense of this thing too, right? Like even if your CEO is saying, "Hey, we have to do agentic AI right now, in production, let's let it rip." You don't want to do that, right? Like start with smaller things, and there are a lot of people. I have some coworkers who are more skeptical of this than others, and find the excited people and like experiment, leverage them and like to experiment with them. As far as segregation, I think that's a great point. I will say that the only thing I want to add to that is that it is hard to slap a gateway in front, right? Or some kind of external system. A lot of fine-grained authorization is super business logic specific and needs to be tied into your application. Um, the last two things I'd say is one is actually I saw a interesting paper that I'll drop in the Slack afterwards that was actually looking at the prompt that was sent to the agent with an LLM or other piece of software and examining it. And if the agent asked for tools that weren't required to serve the prompt, even if it was allowed to with the kind of permission scoping, it would deny access. So you can almost use the LLMs to watch the LLMs. And last thing is OWASP has an entire Gen AI project from a developer perspective. That's a great place to start researching this stuff too. So thank you.
This is fantastic. Yeah, I'm actually going to I'm looking forward to the resources that you can share in Slack after this panel. That's really cool. All right, Tanvi, I'd love to get your thoughts. Or like we've talked about, like needing to watch and sort of, auditing and monitoring what these agents are doing with their access. What's different about this with like from logging and observability when it comes to the agent world versus the traditional user sessions that we're more familiar with?
That's a great question, actually. And I think the blunt answer to this is earlier, teams or organizations used to get away, probably sometimes with like not having as strict of enforcement rules, or going back to Isa's point on not understanding where the data is, so that if anything goes wrong, they could do it in a reactive manner as to figuring out who logged in, what went wrong, the logs, and so on and so forth. But with AI systems, I think it has become super critical. If you're not aware of how this is happening, it's going to result in situations where it would be very hard to revert back into a positive and operational state. So I think that's something of a blunt truth. To keep in mind, right? I think from my organization's perspective and my customers' perspective, I'm making sure that there are centers of excellence that are established, that are kind of looking at the processes being put in place to verify the agentic AI logic that is being applied to each of these, for the lack of better terms, microservices that go and execute on behalf of the human, right? And how are they eventually connecting with each other to create the holistic task that gets executed, right? So that's an area. Going back to, I think Dan mentioned this. This is one more area that I am emphasizing on, is each agent should know what their task is, and for that, prompting is going to be extremely critical to make sure that the agents are aware of the environment and their tasks, right? Um, and then, of course, real-time monitoring, guardrails, proactively looking at these systems is also superbly important. I'll leave it at that on this.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing. Aisha, did you have anything you want to add to this question around like sort of auditing and monitoring?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself for a minute.
No worries.
So make sure you're logging, you're doing everything that you should be doing in terms of logging. So your security teams will know what's essential and what foundational logging looks like. And with any service that you're enabling, so if you're using an example is an AWS AI service, you're enabling logging and monitoring around those. and if you have external identity providers, etc. using. So everything comes together so you can get some sort of correlation as to what malicious could look like. So you're not just storing this log data, but you also know how to work with it. And work with the shields and using an additional LLM. I think there has been some latency issues and how is this going to impact my operation, etc. that organizations have been asking, but some more often than others, security is the top priority. So you just have to consume it and absorb that sort of latency that it might bring. But it's important that you know what to enable and then you get your detections from that as well. And there are also external penetration testing, internal penetration testing, red teaming that you can do to just do some sort of chaos engineering and testing the resiliency of the agents that you're using.
Yeah, makes sense.
Hey,
Stay
Dalia.
on. Yeah, go
Sorry,
ahead, Dan.
before I wanted to ask, Tommy mentioned centers of excellence, and I just want to know kind of like what were the goals and the outputs of centers of excellence, she's found useful in terms of that.
Thanks, Dan. I think the centers of excellence are having, first importantly, business goal alignment, right? And stakeholder alignment. They need to, and I think you mentioned this point around making sure that, hey, if there is a top-down push on just like going and creating agents and agentic AI, there should be a process laid out from a business and strategy point of view as to how we are going to do it. What are the systems we are going to start with? What's our plan B in case things go wrong, right? And then how do we align that to the broader organization's vision to prove the value proposition of the agentic AI systems that we are putting in place? That's the business side of it. From a tech side of it, I think the way I'm looking at agentic AI or encouraging the COEs to look at agentic AI is what actually is your biggest pain point, right? Don't put in agents for the sake of putting in agents and looking cool about it, right? You need to address what your biggest pain point is, be it for your operations teams, your IT teams, your dev teams, your QA teams, and so on and so forth. And then prioritize by asking a couple of questions and surveying a smaller set of people to create like a prototype kind of a function that then you can test in a sandbox environment and then ship out to a larger production environment. And the best part with agents is there is availability to test across multiple agentic AI tools and functions to make sure it suits and validates the checkpoints that we have put along the way.
Yeah, thank you, Tari. This is great. And Dan, I really actually appreciate it. So like with this, why don't we transition into talking about the organization? So I'm curious about like all of you feel free to jump in, but maybe I'll direct the question for Dan to start us off with. But when it comes to like who owns agent authorization decisions in your organization? So like we talked about the technical side of things and how we might consider our implementation and access controls and all of that, but the organization plays quite a bit of a role in the future of the world that we're operating in. So just curious if you want to start us off with this question and your thoughts on it.
Sure. And I will say that like I think that an important place to begin is the size of your organization, right? And this may shock some of you, but FusionOps is smaller than AWS. And so we have a kind of a different kind of approach probably than AWS has, but we have a combination between engineering and security, and depending on the resource, even the IT team gets to kind of weigh in. Um, we're in the early days, just to be totally blunt, but I think one foundational principle that we've all arrived at that makes a lot of sense is that the human is still responsible. So if you're having an agent build out code or build out content or build out, handle business processes, do financial planning or whatever else that agents can help with, at the end of the day, human being is responsible for managing, for owning those outputs. And that's I understand the beauty and desire for autonomous agents that just kind of go off and do things that you want them to do, but at the end of the day, there's a human being who's kicking off that process who has that desire, and to tie things back to that human being, to that human identity is really important.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, Aisha, when it comes to like compliance, so like from that perspective, your SOC 2, your GDPR, and so on, how do you handle the fact that AI agents are accessing and potentially modifying user data? So what does consent even mean in that context? If you want to, take us through it and elaborate on that part.
Yeah, obviously with data access and human or non-human authorization be coming into the mix with AI agents, and we wanted to be able to do a lot. So the stuff that I explained in the beginning, basically presenting a picture where we're now blurring the lines between what it is accessing. So the scope is widening. So if you're looking at SOC 2 type 2, and then you've already scoped it, and now there's an AI agent that's touching up on a whole lot of other things, then your audit will need to include those elements, environments, etc., within your scope, right? So that brings those challenges. In addition to that, it brings the challenge of being not only the audits and auditors coming in armed, understanding it fully and being able to not only articulate what's being asked, but also understand that it is in place, because those are all up in there, to be very honest with you. We'll find some confusing or confused language in audits. I haven't got to those yet, so some definitely a huge learning curve for myself to understand what that means. And yeah, so the boundaries being blurry. What does this mean for GDPR and granular consent? It's not just a yes or no, it's scoped permission. Are you going to do immediate revocation? Maybe you're going to need another AI agent for that
Yeah.
with the permission. Yeah, risk assessment again becomes a challenge with the processes, sensitive data, and is it scale? And then you need to document those risks and mitigations as part of the audits as well.
Yeah, makes
Well,
sense. And
I had a quick
sorry,
question,
Dane.
Bill.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. And I mean, so I read this, I thought about this question. I thought about, what you're saying, Aisha. And I guess my question is, how is the GDPR compliance story for AI agents any different than it would be for a normal, like a software system that's accessing PII? Like, is it, you know, a difference in kind or a difference in, scale or is it just kind of the same rules apply? It's fuzzier because it's also new.
Um, it's also fuzzier because there's not necessarily a clearly defined backend. It's quite dynamic. It keeps moving. You want it to do the best it can do, and it can do the best with data. Okay, so if you've scoped and segregated that data based on your regulatory requirements, then you're limiting your model from access. So there's that sort of conundrum as well. I guess it's not necessarily anything different. If you know exactly what that AI agent is going to do, and you've got a clear use case, and that clear use case is going to provide that, and it's just a matter of complying with GDPR as you would if it was a new type of software, right? Yeah, I guess the complexity comes in when you got a business case that is to enable AI rather than a complete clear problem that you're using AI for, is when it becomes really lovely.
Right. Which I love. That goes back to your point about the guardrail, like having a firm understanding of authorization model at the beginning, and Tanvi's point about like, got to drive a business case. Like, don't chase the shiny object. Do it for business reasons, and you're going to have a lot. It's going to make it easier to have success criteria and easier to comply with the law. Who knew? That's great.
Love it. Yeah, there was a question from Andy, very relevant to this particular conversation that we're having. So, if any of you would like to go into the Q&A and elaborate, but I think we've touched on the answer to it, with the points that you made. So fantastic. All right, maybe we transitioned a little bit future forward, and start maybe like talking a little bit about you're deep into this world. What are your predictions? What are some things that you feel will look very different, or have we sort of converged and you like to the conversation before, the human, like whether it's human or agent, it's still around the same problem definition that we really need to think about. So I'm just curious if any of you want to share your future forward, ideas with the group here.
I mean, I guess I'll go first. I mean, I think that you know, we are going to move towards a more unified system. I think if there's one thing I've learned over 25 years of software development is that people like convenience and agents are driving convenience, right? Like they're making things more efficient. It's a lot easier. I do this myself. It's a lot easier for me to ask an LLM or a tool to give me a summarization of a meeting or to keep track of a meeting so that I can actually, keep track of the to-dos in a meeting so that I can actually pay attention and like contribute than it is for me to take notes. So I think that this wave is coming, and you're going to start to see human beings, agentic systems, and don't forget those deterministic software programs, which still have a place, all have a single source of identity. And then I already kind of mentioned that paper, and I think keeping an eye on the research that's happening, because where things were a year ago is not where things are now. This is less of a prediction and more of like a warning. Like you can't just have a policy and be kind of one and done. Like things are changing way too quick to do that.
Maybe I can add, Dan, to what you were saying, right? I think I'll first go into predictions and then warnings. Going back to your point, my predictions is around this is going to be a part of day-to-day life. Even if we try to be skeptical or try to avoid it, I doubt we are going to be able to do that. So that's another hard, realistic presentation. There are a couple of good podcasts that I listen to that I can even add in the Slack channels as we follow up that gives a perspective on this across industries, right? I think the other prediction is some of the low level lifting that all of us in every job family had to do to accelerate operational excellence, productivity. I think that is where it will do the low hanging fruit stuff in a pretty systematic way, depending on how we configure it to do it. I think that's the second prediction that would get easier. And the warning is I think we all need to start getting hands on and dirty in terms of playing around with these systems and learning and capturing feedback. Because the more we are disconnected from this world, I think it is going to get harder and harder to kind of make sense of where the business and the organizations are headed and also to leave a mark, right? I've started comparing our tech roles to being doctors in the future. Is like, hey, anytime any new surgery, new medical invention comes in, the doctors always needed to be specialists or be like deep into the inventions. I think this is the era for people in tech to be specialists and surgeons and start experimenting and learning through hands-on work.
And Aisha, if you have predictions, I would love to hear them, but I did want to ask, and maybe this is something to do after Aisha gives predictions, is any surprising results of experiments? Because I agree with you, Tanvi, like getting hands-on is the only way to really understand. I have something that was surprising to me that I'd be happy to share, but like I don't want to take away from Aisha's predictions because I want to hear that too. So.
Now I'm a lot more curious about what you're going to say than, what I was going to say. Like, to me, it's just going to be very, very faint. No, so I'll keep it short because I want to hear what you're going to say. So yeah, I think the same as Dan and Tanvi, right? I think we will see, we will settle a little bit in what we understand that we can expect from AI to give us, and how, as we understand more and more, we will also have we will be better equipped to get it to do things in the way that is not going to damage us and provide problems. So yes, use authorization could be harder, but it also means it can be easier if you're doing your data authorization in the background a little bit more cleverly and how you're working with your data. I read an AWS blog post on this previously, and so I'll post a link. It's quite interesting, giving it a different way of thinking. So as things are becoming more data, it's going to be more data, in my opinion, more data focused from authorization perspective. As to what happens with AI agents and how much of our lives will be of it, consumed by it, included in it, interacting with it, the trajectory is definitely up, in my opinion. It'll be interesting. Good times to be alive.
Yeah. All right, Dan, are you going to share with us? Don't leave us hanging.
I feel like I might have built it up too much because when I first encountered I mean, I did some stuff even pre-chat GPT, but like I had it like create poems, right? Or read a blog post that was like, and it was totally mechanical blog post. And the things that really have surprised me, two experiments I've done are one, connecting it to my task tracking system and just saying, what did I do last week? Please summarize it for me so I could report that up. And the second was, I had a bunch of files that were written by people who were non-English speakers, and I just said, please correct the grammar and the spelling of all of this stuff, right? And it wasn't so surprising in that it could do it. It was surprising how good it was at doing it. And it even corrected some things where it was like, this is an incorrect link, right? So, and those are small things. And I think that this goes back to my beginning point is like, don't start out with the multi-agentic systems. Start out and learn the capabilities of these things because we do need to, as Tommy said, get our hands dirty. So sorry if I built that up too much. I'd love to hear what other people had that was the interactions with AI that they were surprised by.
That's really great. There's one question that I want to see if we want to touch on before we wrap up that came through the Q&A. The question goes, I love the idea of LLMs monitoring LLMs. Curious what patterns or architectures are teams using to secure that monitoring layer itself? Aisha?
Me, oh, go ahead.
Go for it, Dan, because I think you first mentioned it, and I'll add later on.
I mean, I mentioned it as like an experimental thing that you gotta keep an eye on. I did not mention it as like a real full running system that I could answer that question with. So, and the one thing I will say is that paper I did mention wasn't just LLMs monitoring LLMs, it was also deterministic systems monitoring LLMs too. And so don't sleep on the fact that you can do things with deterministic systems as well.
Yeah,
I
there are
think,
many. Yes, go for it.
sorry, go ahead, Aisha. Sorry.
Yeah, there are a couple of ways. So you can do live session integrated in as AI agent is interacting with the user in the use case of, let's say, a chatbot. Then you can have an additional model that will be in between. We'll be looking at, in addition to the model's own prompt injection, a shield, etc., guardrail that they have natively, or the platform they're using. You could use another third party, depending on how much of a restriction you want to bring in. Right, that's one aspect. Another one is when I was previously I worked at AWS. When I was there, I did a talk. I think I'll give a link as well. I did a talk of the three principles of AI is one is AI security of AI, and then AI for security, and security against AI. Because we're now looking at AI STEM threats coming in. So how do we secure? So when I'll send a link if I can find. So when you look at that, there will be other options where you can integrate in AI-based solutions into your overall security controls and capabilities.
That would be great. Yeah, I'm really excited actually about the follow-ups from this panel and all the resources that each of you might want to share there. So I encourage you to I encourage like the panelists and the participants to join the Slack channel to continue this conversation. This was clear, really fantastic. I really appreciate the notes and experiences that you're bringing to the table. As we've talked today. Like the world ahead of us does not leave the fundamentals of what we've learned about the humans' permissions and authorization. So like that's still very, very important. And as we layer in agents and continue to deploy them in very useful use cases, which will allow them to take actions on our behalf, we need to continue to augment the systems that we have to sort of get the problem solved. And I think Tanvi, I really like that framing of like it's not just like AI for the sake of it, but we are truly like I would say like for this year, I'm super excited to start to get into the value of the application itself and what more complex problems we can possibly solve that maybe weren't as attainable before. So there's a lot more to look forward to. We are going to wrap up here since we are at time, but I want to thank you again for joining. I want to thank the panelists for preparing ahead of this and joining the conversation. This was really fantastic, and I very, very much appreciate your time and all the that you had to share today. So thank you for that. All right, everyone.
Thank you.
It's great
Thanks.
to see you. Bye, everyone. Talk to you later. See you on Slack.